The weight of leadership settled over Taehyung as he immersed himself in his work, his focus unwavering, yet, between decisions, negotiations, and pressing meetings, his mind kept drifting back to the scent clinging to his shirt, back to the warmth Jungkook had left behind. Serafina moved seamlessly within his space, adjusting to the rhythm of his work as if she had always belonged there. As she organized files on his desk, she glanced up cautiously. "Sir, would you like coffee or tea?" Taehyung barely looked away from his laptop. "Black coffee, no sugar." Serafina nodded before stepping out, returning moments later with a sleek porcelain cup, placing it precisely within reach. Taehyung took a sip, then paused, catching something familiar in the aroma. His gaze flickered up. "Did Jungkook brief you about my coffee too?" Serafina hesitated, then offered a small smile. "Yes, he said you hate anything too sweet but need a strong kick to keep you from zoning out into deep thoughts." Taehyung huffed a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Always Jungkook, always knowing. But Serafina wasn't finished. She adjusted the tablet beside him, ensuring his meeting details were perfectly aligned. "He also said you forget to eat when you're too focused." Taehyung leaned back slightly, amusement flickering behind his sharp gaze. "And yet, you still assumed he was just my friend." Serafina's lips parted, uncertain of how to respond. Taehyung smirked, watching the realization settle in her eyes. "Guess you'll figure it out soon enough." Just then, his phone vibrated, a message lighting up the screen. Taehyung stared at the message on his phone, exhaling a quiet sigh that held more fondness than frustration. "Eat, or I'm personally walking into that office and feeding you myself." He pressed his thumb against his lower lip, his smirk barely contained, before typing a response. "Wouldn't mind that, actually." A few seconds passed before his phone buzzed again. Tae, just his name, but Taehyung could practically hear the warning laced in Jungkook's voice. He huffed a quiet chuckle, shaking his head before setting his phone aside and reaching for the snack basket Jungkook had ensured he'd have. Serafina observed silently, noticing the easy way Taehyung's mood shifted whenever Jungkook entered his orbit, even through a text. Taehyung gathered the documents on his desk, his mind shifting to the upcoming meeting. He adjusted his blazer and checked his watch. Sira, ever efficient, was already at the door with her tablet and a small leather-bound notebook. "You'll be meeting Mr. Reginald Nathaniel and the board members in the main conference room," Sira said, her tone calm. "I've ensured that all the files are in order. If you need anything during the meeting, just signal me." Taehyung glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're oddly reassuring for someone who's only been here a day." Sira's lips curved slightly, a hint of amusement flickering in her gaze. "Just doing my job, sir." As they arrived at the conference room, Sira paused, her expression softening just slightly. "You don't have to prove anything, they're already waiting to follow your lead." Taehyung stopped for a moment, her words settling over him like a quiet bomb. He gave her a small nod before pushing the doors open, mentally noting how composed she was. Jungkook really had made a wise choice in selecting her. He stepped into the room where his grandfather and the rest of the board awaited. Inside the room, the board members sit in a semicircle, their sharp eyes appraising Taehyung as he enters. At the head of the table is Reginald Nathaniel, his presence commanding respect with an air of quiet authority. His steely gaze softens for just a moment as he regards his grandson, a flicker of pride that only Taehyung might notice. The meeting begins with formalities, but Taehyung quickly finds himself fielding rapid-fire questions about his vision for the corporation. Reginald lets him speak, watching closely. Sira, seated discreetly to one side, takes detailed notes and occasionally slides a document toward Taehyung just as he needs it. He glances at her with a brief, grateful smile. She's proving to be as efficient as Jungkook had promised. However, the ease of their interaction is not lost on Reginald, whose sharp eyes linger on them for a beat longer than necessary. The meeting concludes with murmurs of approval, but as Taehyung steps out of the room, the adrenaline fades, leaving him feeling drained. Sira hands him a bottle of water, her voice calm and professional. You did well, sir. They'll come around fully once they see the impact of your decisions. Taehyung glanced at her, a flicker of gratitude in his sharp gaze. He didn't say anything, but her encouragement landed where it needed to. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he unlocked the screen and started dialing Jungkook. At home, Jungkook paced back and forth in the living room, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. It had been hours since their last exchange, a sweet moment, but far too brief for his liking. He stared at the chat screen, willing Taehyung's name to pop up again, but the phone remained silent. He flopped down onto the couch, then immediately stood back up. His thoughts were racing. Taehyung's busy, that's all. He'll call when he can, but the reassurance felt hollow. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to send another message, but he stopped himself. Finally, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface, he grabbed his car keys. I'll just check on him, he thought, though even he knew how flimsy the excuse sounded. Driving through the city, he rehearsed what he might say, but by the time he pulled up in front of Nathaniel Mining Corporation, doubt had taken hold. He sat in his car, the engine off, staring up at the imposing glass building. His heart was racing, and for a moment, he considered turning back, but the gnawing unease wouldn't let him. With a deep breath, Jungkook stepped out of the car. He made his way inside, his nerves jangling with every step. As he approached Taehyung's office, he hesitated, his hand pausing just before the door. From inside, he could hear soft voices, Taehyung's familiar tone and someone else's, measured and calm. He pushed the door open gently. Taehyung stood by his desk, his phone in hand, clearly about to call. Beside him, Sira was organizing papers on the table, her presence composed as always. Taehyung's gaze snapped up when Jungkook entered, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer. "Ru," Taehyung said, his voice a mix of surprise and fondness. Jungkook's eyes darted between Taehyung and Sira, his unease bubbling to the surface despite the warmth in Taehyung's voice. "Tae-ni," he murmured, his voice quieter than he'd intended. Taehyung set his phone down, stepping around the desk toward Jungkook. "I was just about to call you." I was nearby," Jungkook lied unconvincingly. "Thought I'd check in." The tension in his voice didn't escape Taehyung, but he decided not to press. Instead, he reached for Jungkook's hand, giving it a small squeeze. "You're here now, that's what matters." "You've been restless, haven't you?" Taehyung asked softly, his eyes searching Jungkook's. Jungkook hesitated, his free hand brushing through his hair. "I just missed you." Taehyung's expression softened, his fingers curling around Jungkook's. "I missed you too, Ru, more than you know." Jungkook stood frozen for a moment, his gaze locked on Taehyung, the sight of him sharp in his tailored suit, yet softened by the faint smile that lingered as he stared at him, was enough to unravel Jungkook's restraint. Sira, sensing the need for privacy, quietly excused herself, leaving the room with her usual efficiency. Jungkook watched her go, his chest tightening, but Taehyung's hand in his brought his focus back. Taehyung barely had time to speak before Jungkook's hands were on him, pulling him close, their bodies colliding against the edge of the oak desk with a muted thud. "Ru," Taehyung started, his voice breathless, but Jungkook silenced him with a kiss, fierce and unyielding. It wasn't just passion, it was need, raw and consuming, the kind that left no room for words. The desk creaked under their weight as Jungkook pressed closer, his fingers curling into the fabric of Taehyung's blazer as if anchoring himself. Taehyung responded in kind, his hands finding their way to Jungkook's face, his touch tender despite the intensity of the moment. Outside the door, Sira paused, her hand still on the handle. The faint sound of the desk shifting reached her ears, and though she didn't linger, the glimpse she caught through the closing door was enough to leave her momentarily stunned. She adjusted her tablet and walked away. As the door closed behind Sira, Jungkook pulled away just enough to rest his forehead against Taehyung's, his breath uneven. Taehyung's chest rose and fell rapidly, his hand still gripping Jungkook's waist for support. Jungkook leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to Taehyung's temple, his earlier unease easing just slightly. "Rue," Taehyung murmured, his voice low and slightly raspy. Jungkook's eyes flickered with something fleeting relief, doubt, longing all swirling together. He whispered, "It feels like I'm chasing after you, Tae, like you're drifting just out of reach." Taehyung's brows furrowed, his hands tightening slightly on Jungkook. "Rue, you're my anchor. If I drift, it's only because I trust you to pull me back." Words hit Jungkook squarely in the chest, and his expression softened, though the restlessness in his heart remained just below the surface. "I know you mean that," he murmured, his forehead still pressed to Taehyung's, "but I need you to tell me more often." Taehyung nodded, his tone turning serious as he said, "Then I'll tell you every single day if I have to, every hour if it keeps you with me." Jungkook dipped his face into the curve of Taehyung's neck, his lips brushing against the warm skin there. "I couldn't stay away," he murmured, his voice low and filled with need. "I needed to see you." Taehyung's heart raced, his arms wrapping tightly around Jungkook's torso as he pressed closer. "You're impossible," he whispered, though his tone carried no real frustration, only affection. Jungkook pulled back slightly, his hands sliding up to cup Taehyung's face, his thumbs brushed over Taehyung's cheekbones, his touch tender yet desperate. "Tae," he said softly, his voice trembling with emotion, "don't look at me like that." Taehyung's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes locking onto Jungkook's. "Like what?" he asked, his voice teasing but filled with warmth. Jungkook didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in, pressing his forehead against Taehyung's, their breaths mingling in the quiet space. Taehyung's hand slid down to Jungkook's waist, pulling him closer, their bodies flush against each other. Unable to resist, Taehyung began peppering slow, lingering kisses across Jungkook's face, each one deliberate and filled with unspoken emotion. His arm tightened around Jungkook's waist, holding him as though letting go wasn't an option. Until a faint knock sounded at the door, Jungkook tensed, stepping back as Taehyung straightened, smoothing down his suit. "It's probably Sira," Taehyung said, his voice quieter now. Jungkook glanced at the door, a flicker of something crossing his face, an emotion Taehyung couldn't quite place, but before Taehyung could say anything, the door opened slightly, and Sira stepped in, her expression as composed as ever. "Sir," she said smoothly, holding out a file, "the contracts for the next meeting." Taehyung nodded, taking the file and giving her a polite smile. "Thank you, Sira." Jungkook's gaze lingered on Sira briefly, his hand brushing against Taehyung's arm as if to remind himself who truly stood beside him. The earlier intensity between them simmered quietly as Jungkook moved toward the door, his steps deliberate. "I'll see you at home, Tae," he said softly, his voice carrying an undercurrent of something Taehyung couldn't ignore. "I'll be there soon," Taehyung replied, watching Jungkook go with a mixture of love and concern. Sira glanced at Taehyung once Jungkook had left, her tone professional but curious as she said, "Should I reschedule your next call, sir?" Taehyung shook his head, though his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. "No, let's keep it as is." As he sat back down at his desk, his mind wandered to the weight in Jungkook's voice, the faint restlessness that had lingered in his eyes, and for the first time that day, everything felt secondary. Jungkook made his way toward the car, his hands fumbling with the keys as his mind replayed the last few minutes. He glanced up at the gleaming building, debating whether he should leave or march back in. Just as he reached for the car door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The name flashing on the screen made his heart jump. "Tae." Without hesitation, he answered. "Hey, Tae." His voice softened instantly, the restlessness from earlier easing at the sound of Taehyung's breathing on the other end. "Baby," Taehyung began, his tone gentle but urgent. "Hold on, come back." Jungkook froze, the key still poised in his hand. "Come back," he repeated, his brow furrowing. "Why, is everything okay?" Taehyung smiled faintly, his free hand resting on the desk. since you're already here, let's meet Granddad and talk about the wedding, shall we? Jungkook blinked in surprise, the suggestion catching him off guard. He hesitated. But you've got a meeting, Tae. Yeah, right, Taehyung trailed off, tapping his fingers lightly on the desk as he thought. Babe, all right, would you mind waiting, love, just until I'm done? Jungkook leaned against the car, a faint grin tugging at his lips. Let's do one thing, I'll head out for a bit and come back by the time you're finished, deal? Taehyung's brows knit slightly as he leaned forward, pressing the phone closer to his ear. Are you going somewhere? Jungkook's grin widened, his tone light and teasing. Just using my man's money and buying things. Taehyung let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Sounds good, buy a skirt. Jungkook's laugh followed, quick and full of mischief. You planning to wear a skirt to the office tomorrow, Tae? Taehyung threw his head back, a rare, genuine laugh escaping him. I think I should stop teasing my bloke. Probably wise, Jungkook quipped, his voice softer now. There was a pause, brief but loaded with unspoken affection. Taehyung's hand lingered on the edge of the desk as he murmured, Rue, anything for you, Jungkook replied, the sincerity in his voice wrapping Taehyung like a warm embrace. As the call ended, Taehyung exhaled deeply, staring at his phone with a mix of fondness and longing. He'd suggested the wedding discussion as an excuse, but the truth was simpler. He didn't like leaving Jungkook feeling alone. He needed him close always. Taehyung leaned back in his chair, rubbing the tension from his temples as he glanced at Sira, who was organizing files on the table nearby. Sira, he said, his voice firm but not dismissive, can you check if Granddad's free to talk after my next meeting? Sira paused, adjusting her glasses slightly before nodding. Of course, sir. I'll confirm with his secretary and let you know. Taehyung gave her a small nod, turning his attention back to the reports sprawled across his desk. His thoughts flickered briefly to Jungkook, and he exhaled softly, wondering how long his Rue would be out. Sira tapped on her tablet as she reached out to Reginald's secretary, her tone professional but precise. This is Serafina from Mr. Taehyung's office. He's hoping to meet with Mr. Reginald Nathaniel after his next meeting. Is that possible? The secretary's response was quick but unexpected. Actually, Mr. Nathaniel has asked to see you directly. Could you come to his office? Sira blinked, briefly surprised, but her voice remained steady. Of course, I'll be there shortly. Minutes later, Sira found herself standing in Reginald's stately office, the air thick with authority and history. Reginald, seated behind his grand mahogany desk, gestured for her to approach. Serafina, correct, he began, his voice firm but measured. Yes, sir, she replied, her posture poised. Reginald's piercing gaze didn't waver as he asked, how long was Mr. Jungkook here in the office with Taehyung today? Sira's brows lifted slightly in surprise, though she quickly masked her reaction. Just over 15 minutes, sir, from when he arrived to when he left the cabin. Reginald nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, though there was a flicker of thoughtfulness behind his sharp eyes. I see, you may leave now. Before she could turn, Reginald added, inform Taehyung I'm free to meet whenever he's ready. Sira inclined her head respectfully, stepping out of the office with her thoughts racing. While she hadn't expected the question, her professionalism kept her steady, even as curiosity gnawed at her. What interest did Reginald have in Jungkook's presence? Taehyung stepped out of the meeting room, his shoulders relaxing as the weight of the discussion lifted. His eyes immediately found Jungkook, leaning casually against the wall near the corridor, his presence magnetic even in the simplest of moments. Rue, Taehyung called softly, his lips curving into a smile that reached his eyes. Jungkook straightened, his own grin spreading wide as he walked toward Taehyung. Done being the boss for now, Jungkook teased, his voice light but filled with affection. Taehyung chuckled, slipping an arm around Jungkook's waist as they began walking toward Reginald's floor. For now, but don't let me fool you, I'm still your boss. Jungkook laughed, nudging Taehyung playfully. You wish. Their laughter echoed softly in the hallway, their steps in sync as they exchanged jokes and playful banter. Taehyung's hand stayed firmly on Jungkook's waist, a silent declaration of their bond that neither cared to hide. As they reached the elevator, the mood shifted, the door slid open, and they stepped inside, the space suddenly feeling smaller as the air between them grew charged. The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet intensity as their gazes locked. Jungkook's eyes softened, his hand brushing against Taehyung's arm. "Tae," he murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. Taehyung didn't respond immediately. Instead, he dipped his face against Jungkook's chest, his arms wrapping tightly around Jungkook's torso. The scent of Jungkook's cologne mixed with the faint musk of his skin, grounding Taehyung in a way nothing else could. "Don't stop me, babe," Taehyung whispered, his voice muffled against Jungkook's chest. Jungkook's breath hitched, his hands instinctively finding their way to Taehyung's back. Holding him close, he dipped his face into Taehyung's hair, inhaling deeply, the scent maddening and familiar all at once. "Never," he murmured, his voice barely audible. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, the world outside the elevator forgotten. The soft hum of the machinery was the only sound, a quiet backdrop to their moment of stillness and connection. The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open to reveal Reginald's floor. Slowly, Taehyung pulled back, his hands lingering on Jungkook's waist as they stepped out. The intensity in their eyes softened, replaced by quiet smiles as they walked toward Reginald's cabin, their bond unshaken and undeniable. Taehyung knocked lightly on the ornate door before stepping into the grand office. Reginald was seated behind his desk, his presence commanding as always, yet his expression softened the moment he noticed Jungkook walking in behind Taehyung. "Ah, Jungkook," Reginald said warmly, rising from his chair. He extended a hand, which Jungkook shook firmly but respectfully. "It's always good to see you. How's life treating you, young man?" Jungkook smiled, his tone polite yet genuine. "Very well, Grandad. Thank you for asking." Reginald's gaze lingered on Jungkook, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Good, good. I trust Taehyung is keeping you entertained with his antics?" Taehyung rolled his eyes as he took a seat at the table in front of the desk. "Can we focus, Grandad?" Reginald chuckled, motioning for them both to sit. Of course, of course. What's on your mind, Tae?" Taehyung leaned forward slightly, his tone measured yet purposeful. "The wedding, we want to start planning it." Reginald raised an eyebrow, his expression carefully neutral. "Isn't it too early, Taehyung? You've just assumed the post of CEO. Can you handle the pressures of office operations and marriage preparations at the same time?" Taehyung's jaw tightened, his frustration evident as he leaned back in his chair. "I can handle it, Grandad. Don't underestimate me." Before the tension could escalate further, Jungkook's hand found Taehyung's under the table, their fingers intertwining gently. The touch was grounding, and Taehyung's sharp expression softened almost instantly. Reginald's keen eyes caught the subtle exchange, his gaze lingering on how Taehyung seemed to melt under Jungkook's steadying presence. "I don't mind," Reginald said after a pause, his tone calm, "but my condition is that your full focus remains on office operations. I won't have you distracted by anything wedding or otherwise." Taehyung's lips pressed into a thin line, but he gave a small nod, sensing the tension. Reginald smoothly shifted topics. "Now, where do you plan to hold the function?" "We were thinking of the Aurora Gardens," Taehyung began, but he was cut off by Reginald raising a hand. "No," Reginald said firmly, "it should be held at the Nathaniel Mansion. That's where it belongs." Taehyung's irritation was palpable as he leaned forward. "Of course you'd say that. You don't trust me to make a single decision on my own, do you?" Reginald's voice remained calm, though his words carried weight. "I don't need any chaos from your friends on such an important day." Taehyung narrowed his eyes. "You've got problems with everything about me, don't you?" "No," Reginald said quietly, his tone almost fatherly. "Not with everything. Did I ever complain about your decision to have Jungkook in your life?" Taehyung blinked, Caught off guard by the statement, Reginald continued, his gaze shifting to Jungkook. The only right decision you've ever made, Taehyung, is this boy. Understand that I'm not against the marriage, I'm against a bunch of losers ruining it. Taehyung's frustration boiled over as he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. So you want me to stop my friends from attending the most important day of my life? He demanded. Reginald's expression didn't waver. If that's possible, yes. The words hit hard, and without another word, Taehyung turned and walked out of the room, his frustration evident in the sharpness of his movements. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Jungkook alone with Reginald. Jungkook shifted slightly in his seat before speaking, his tone even but firm. Granddad, it's his wedding. I think he has every right to have the people he loves around him. Reginald's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Jungkook. You don't know them yet, Jungkook, he said, his voice measured. But yes, I'll accept your words, for now. There was a pause before Reginald leaned back in his chair, his tone turning slightly pointed. Make sure his attention stays where it needs to on the office matters. No wasting time, not even 10 minutes. Jungkook nodded, his expression unreadable as he rose to leave. I'll do my best. As he stepped out of the office, the weight of the conversation settled over him. He glanced down the hallway, where Taehyung had disappeared, and sighed softly, already thinking of how to soothe him. Taehyung stormed down the hallway, his long strides echoing through the quiet space. His breath came in short bursts, frustration and hurt bubbling just beneath the surface. Reaching the tall glass window at the end of the corridor, he stopped, his gaze falling to the bustling streets below. The movement of cars and people felt distant, their noise muffled by the thick pane of glass. For a moment, he simply stood there, trying to gather himself, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Tae, Jungkook's voice called out from behind, urgent but soft, breaking through Taehyung's haze of emotions. The sound of his nickname alone was enough to make Taehyung's shoulders stiffen, though his feet remained planted. Jungkook caught up quickly, his footsteps slowing as he neared Taehyung. He hesitated for just a moment before stepping closer, wrapping his arms around Taehyung from behind. His palms rested firmly yet gently against Taehyung's chest, and he felt the rapid thud of Taehyung's heartbeat beneath his fingertips. Leaning in, Jungkook pressed his face near the curve of Taehyung's neck, his lips grazing the sensitive skin as he inhaled deeply. Tae, Jungkook murmured, his voice low and soothing. Calm down, I'll handle everything. Taehyung's tension began to melt away under the warmth of Jungkook's touch. Slowly, he turned around, his eyes finding Jungkook's and locking onto them with an intensity that spoke volumes. Jungkook felt the weight of that gaze, the vulnerability, the fire, the unspoken words that Taehyung carried so deeply. Taehyung cupped Jungkook's face with both hands, his touch tender, almost reverent. His thumbs brushed over Jungkook's cheekbones, his fingers curling slightly against the edges of his jaw. The closeness between them was electric, yet grounding all at once. Don't look at me like that, Tae, Jungkook murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, though it carried every ounce of his affection. His own hand slid to Taehyung's waist, holding him close, steadying them both. Taehyung didn't respond with words. Instead, he pulled Jungkook into a hug, his arms wrapping tightly around his lover's back. Jungkook didn't hesitate. His own arms enveloped Taehyung, holding him even closer as if trying to shield him from everything that had upset him moments ago. From down the hallway, Sera's footsteps slowed briefly as she caught sight of them. She hadn't meant to intrude, but the scene was impossible to ignore. The way Jungkook held Taehyung so fiercely, his head dipped slightly against Taehyung's hair, was an image that stayed with her as she walked on, her gaze flickering with a mix of curiosity and respect. But Jungkook didn't care. He'd seen her out of the corner of his eye, but nothing else mattered in that moment. If anything, he held Taehyung even tighter, refusing to let go. Taehyung didn't pull away either. Instead, he relaxed further into Jungkook's embrace. Taehyung pulled away just enough to meet those doe eyes soft, searching. Jungkook's hands, warm and steady, found their place against Tae's chest. Let's head home, Jungkook murmured. I think we need a private conversation. A blush crept onto his cheeks. Tae smiled, nodding, about to take his leave when his attention flickered to his secretary Sira. Poor Sira, hesitating in the hallway, unsure whether to pass her boss or turn back the way she came. Tae stepped back, giving her room. I'll grab my things and come, he said, turning on his heels toward his cabin. Jungkook watched him go, restless. That same intensity pulled Sira's attention. His possessiveness over Taehyung was unmistakable, and for some reason, it unsettled her. The way Jungkook watched his lover with that unwavering devotion, it was terrifying, yet oddly mesmerizing. Sira, Taehyung's voice cut through the air, snapping her out of her daze. She shifted her focus, offering Jungkook a polite smile before stepping into the cabin. Inside, Tae was gathering his things, his movements unhurried. Yes, sir, I'm heading home, Tae said, strolling toward the door. Then just before crossing the threshold, he turned to her, his expression softer now, more thoughtful. I'm sorry for putting you in an awkward situation, but now you understand who Jungkook is to me, right? Sira held his gaze, processing his words. His voice carried something gentle, something considerate. We'll be mindful not to make things difficult for you, he added, offering a small, knowing smile. Her shoulders eased. A quiet chuckle escaped her lips. It's really fine, sir. You two look great together. Taehyung tilted his head slightly, amused. Do we? She nodded. Yeah, congratulations, sir. Jungkook is perfect. Tae let out a light laugh, shaking his head. And I'm not. Another chuckle from Sira. Of course you are, sir. She met his eyes, a playful glint in hers. Perfect. Taehyung held her gaze for a moment before his eyes flicked down, thoughtful, assessing. What's the shade of your lipstick, Sira? The question took her by surprise, catching her off guard. Was he flirting? The notion made her blink. Sir, it's Rouge Louboutin. Tae hummed, as if filing the detail away. Thank you, dear Sira. See you tomorrow. And with that, Taehyung stepped out of the cabin, back to Jungkook, who was waiting impatiently, his unwavering stare burning through the very door Tae had just walked through. That intensity, that quiet claim. The door swung open, and Jungkook instinctively stepped aside, his brows furrowing as he took in the sight before him. Tae's mother standing rigid, her son Flynn close at her side, her expression taut with disbelief and simmering anger. Jungkook's gaze flicked over his shoulder to Tae, who had just reached the doorway. A slow smirk curled at the corner of his lips, not of amusement, but of defense, of masking the ache beneath sharpness. Well, Mom, what a surprise, Tae drawled, his voice laced with sarcasm. His mother's stare was cold, unyielding. Tae exhaled, shifting slightly as he gestured loosely toward Jungkook. My mom Rue, and her son, he muttered flatly. Flynn rolled his eyes, making no attempt to disguise his lack of enthusiasm. Jungkook, composed as ever, offered a polite smile. Hello to both of you, he said, voice smooth but unreadable. The silence was suffocating, thick with unsaid words. Tae didn't give his mother the chance to speak first. I know you want to talk, he cut in swiftly, tone firm. Let's do it outside. She hesitated just for a breath but then followed. Tae led her toward the backyard, his steps measured, the weight of what was coming pressing against his spine. Inside, Jungkook turned to Flynn, his usual easy demeanor returning. He gestured toward the gaming console on the coffee table. You into games? Flynn eyed him, skeptical. Yeah. Jungkook smirked, picking up the controller. Let's see if you're any good then. The tension eased, if only for the moment, as Flynn settled beside Jungkook, their conversation unfolding with unexpected ease. Then, you're Tae's boyfriend, Flynn asked bluntly. Jungkook glanced at him, neither defensive nor surprised. I am. Flynn hummed, fingers tapping against the controller. You're too cool for this family. Jungkook chuckled. You don't like your brother? Flynn scoffed. No. Jungkook's gaze softened. Well, I love your brother. His voice was steady, certain. He's the best, you know. Something flickered across Flynn's face. He didn't respond, not right away, but Jungkook could see the words settling somewhere deeper than the surface. Meanwhile, outside, what is this, Tae? His mother demanded, sharp, accusatory. You have a boyfriend from overseas, and you never thought to tell your own mother. You're planning a wedding, for God's sake. Tae's jaw tightened. He let out a hollow laugh. Oh please, you were too busy with your second family. His tone was biting, wounded. Don't worry, I would have sent the invitation. Her expression darkened, but she steadied herself. And your grandfather, she pressed, does he know? Is he okay with this? The so-called heir of this family marrying a man? Tae's patience snapped. And what's wrong with that? Her voice was cold, measured. Nothing is wrong unless he's lost his mind. Do you think Reginald Nathaniel will accept this without expecting something in return? Is this life you're building, Tae? She said, voice low but edged. Did you even think about what it means, what it costs? You're marrying a man, Tae. How did your grandfather agree to this? Do you even realize what you're asking of him? Tae met her gaze, unflinching. I'm not asking him for anything. She let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. You say that, but you know it's not that simple. Her voice was bitter, weary. What man, what leader doesn't want to see his own blood carried forward, his name, his legacy living beyond him? Her fingers tightened around her forearm. And you are his only heir, Tae. Tae swallowed, his jaw clenching slightly. She scoffed, pressing further. Do you think Reginald Nathaniel accepted this because he suddenly became progressive? Because he stopped caring about his dynasty? Tae's silence spoke volumes. You think he agreed without a reason, without expectations? Her gaze bore into him, searching for a crack, a hesitation. So tell me, Tae, what is he planning? The words struck deeper than he wanted them to. For a fleeting second, something in Tae's expression flickered, uncertainty, hesitation. Then, in a breath, he masked it. I don't care what he's thinking, Tae said, his voice flat. I won't shape my life to fit anyone's expectations, not his, not yours. She exhaled slowly, her eyes dimming with something more complex, worry, regret, maybe even fear. Watch your step, Tae, she murmured. I don't want you to make choices that leave you and that boy hurting. And with that, she turned and left, Flynn scrambling to follow. Inside, Tae stepped into the living room, Jungkook already standing, watching him with quiet intensity. Sorry about that, Rue, Tae said, voice devoid of emotion. She didn't talk to you. Jungkook's lips pressed into a faint line. That's okay, Tae. Tae inhaled sharply. Excuse me, Rue, I've got work. Jungkook's gaze didn't waver. Tae, did she say something? Tae hesitated, his breath catching for a fleeting second before exhaling a quiet release of something heavier than words could hold. His voice, when it came, was softer now, stripped down to something raw, something bare. Nothing, babe, he murmured, but even he could hear the weight behind it. He swallowed, eyes flickering for just a moment before settling. All I need is a family, Rue, a real one, my own. His voice wavered, the truth pressing against the edge of his ribs, not just to forget the pain they caused me, but because I've spent my whole life feeling like I didn't have one to begin with. Jungkook felt it, every word, every ache buried beneath it. Tae let out a quiet breath, almost bitter, almost resigned. I want something that's mine, something I can love, something I can live in. His gaze lifted, searching Jungkook's as if silently asking, could this be it? And Jungkook, heart aching, throat dry, held his gaze like he had no other answer to give. Jungkook swallowed hard, nodding wordlessly as Tae turned toward his room, disappearing behind the door. Left alone, Jungkook drifted toward the balcony, his breath uneven, his hands pressing against the railing. Tae's mother's words rang loud in his head, a child, a heir, Tae the only heir, and Jungkook could never be the one to give that to him. And when Tae had said all he needed was a family, had he meant that Had he wished for something Jungkook couldn't give? His stomach twisted, his chest ached in ways it hadn't before, the weight of the fear, the doubt pressed down so hard he thought he might break under it. And then, for the first time in his life, Jungkook screamed, loud, hard, into the open air. Because the thought of losing Tae, losing Tae was something he could not survive.